Yo, what's going on guys, Arekkz here and welcome back to another Monster Hunter Cross video and another episode of the Weapon Workshop. We're on to episode 5 now, but if you've missed any of the previous episodes, you can find a link to the playlist in the description box down below. However, this week we're turning our attention to the Charge Blade, a weapon that was once known for being overpowered in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, but after a few nerfs and changes is now a lot more balanced. It's still an amazing weapon, but it's different to the Charge Blade you used to know. This video, however, won't be going over the changes specifically, so if you do want a concise video explaining exactly how the weapon differs when compared to Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, then you can find a link to that in the description box down below. This video is of course a weapon tutorial, which means I'm going to be explaining how the weapon works, and much like the insect glaive, it's pretty complicated and there's a lot to cover. So let's not waste any more time and let's get started. To begin with, as always, we're going to start in guild style. Despite the changes, it will still be most familiar to those of you coming over from Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. However, before we start talking about the moves, I'm going to take a moment to explain exactly how the weapon works. See, the Charge Blade is a weapon of two halves. You have the sword and shield mode and you have the axe mode. They each have their own distinct uses and both should be used in combat. And while in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate you are able to favour one over the other a lot more, in Monster Hunter Cross the emphasis is really on using them together. In fact, in Japanese the weapon is called Charge Axe, which kind of goes to illustrate that the axe is indeed the core component of the weapon. At the top of the screen you'll notice this shield icon and these bottles, or files as they're known. Attacking whilst in sword and shield mode will begin to charge these files. First they go yellow, then they go red, and if you continue to attack whilst they're red, they'll eventually go into an overcharged state. This is something you want to avoid at all costs, because it will make every single one of your attacks bounce, and ultimately it'll slow you down. Once yellow or red, you can then fill your files, and doing so adds an additional element to your axe attacks, but we'll cover that shortly. The files can also be transferred into your shield, and the shield charge also has two colours, just like the files, but this time it's different to how it worked in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. See, a red shield charge is what you ideally want to aim for. Whilst in this mode your axe gains an attack boost, but you also gain increased guarding power, so blocking like this is stronger than blocking without. Plus, guarding like this will not decrease your sharpness. Also, whilst in red, your regular blocks provide a burst which was previously only accessible through guard points, and these deal damage. So in effect, you could fight a monster by simply blocking. It's actually quite funny to watch, especially if you sit there, just block and let the monster headbutt you, and eventually it will knock itself over, make itself flinch, and maybe even knock itself out if you're using an impact type charge blade. On top of that, red shield charge also lasts much longer than it used to, a whopping 3 minutes in fact, and once the timer begins to drop, it won't drop to yellow, it will instead simply end. See, red and yellow are now two very different states. Blocking whilst in yellow shield charge reduces your sharpness reduction but doesn't prevent it, and your regular blocks no longer gain burst attacks, and nor do your guard points. So in short, you want to avoid this wherever possible. Its main use is that it gives you easy access to the ultra burst, which again is something we'll talk about shortly. For now, just know that the changes to the Charge Blade really encourage axe use. So the way to use this weapon now is to use sword and shield to get your necessary charge on files, and switch to axe mode for the damage. As a final note, it's also important to note that Charge Blades come in two forms, Impact and Elemental. Impact files deal impact damage through bursts and your super or ultra, whilst Elemental Charge Blades deal elemental. And while Impact is usually the fan favourite due to the added KO bonus, they both have their uses. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's actually take a look at the moves. Starting off with sword and shield. With your weapon drawn, pressing X performs a diagonal slice. Pressing X a second time will perform a follow-up up slice, and pressing X a third time will perform a roundhouse slice that ends in a guard point, and I'll talk about guard points in a bit. Pressing A will perform an up slash, but holding A will then charge this, and upon releasing the button, you'll get a more powerful charge up slash followed by a down slash. This is also one of the best moves for charging your files, as it will charge them much faster than any other move. You can then chain your X and A attacks together in a number of different ways. For example, you can go X and then A, or X, X and then A, or a whole combo like X, X, X and then A. Also, after any attack you can press left or right and B to sidestep, and you can then follow this sidestep with an X input for a roundhouse slash that also ends in a guard point. Similarly, you could just roll out of your moves should you want to. Also, pressing X after a roll will perform an up slice. Pressing X and A together will perform an advancing slash, and this is the same as forward and X whilst your weapon is sheathed. However, if you press X and A after an attack, you'll also perform a shield thrust. For example, X, X and A, or X, X, X and A, or even A, X and A. This is also great for filling up your files and also applying status effects if you have them. If you then follow the shield thrust with a second X plus A input, you'll then transfer any charged or filled files into your shield. Do note, however, that this will always give you yellow shield charge no matter how many files you transfer. If you want red, you now have to do it from axe mode, but again, we'll speak about that shortly. As a side note, this also used to be a shortcut to the Super or Ultra Burst in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, but now it's used solely for charging your shield. Now if you hold down R, you'll block, and as mentioned earlier, blocking with a charged shield is more powerful than blocking without it. And of course, blocking with red gives you burst attacks, so make sure you always do that. R+A will then transfer any charge you have into your files, so when they are glowing, this is how you fill them. Yellow will fill 3, and red will fill all 5. Finally, R+X will transform you into Axe mode. And now that you know how to morph into Axe mode, we might as well talk about Axe moves. Firstly, with your weapon sheath, you can draw straight into Axe with R+X+A. Pressing X will perform an upswing, and yes, this will knock your teammates flying, and pressing X a second time will follow this with a downswing. Forward+X will perform an overhead chop, and you can also combo that by going X, X, forward and X. Pressing A will perform a side swipe, pressing A second time will perform a double roundhouse slash, and pressing A third time will initiate the super burst animation. It's also worth noting that if your files are charged, your A attacks will also gain special bursts. These are stronger, and they either gain impact or elemental damage depending on the charge blade you have. Now if you want to combo your A attacks without going into super burst, you can simply go A, and then X, and you can then cycle AX continually. However, if you want to go into your super burst without the lengthy triple A combo windup, you can also just press X and A together to initiate it. Now this animation will vary based on what you have filled and charged. If you have just files filled, it'll result in a super burst, but if you have your shield charged, it'll result in an ultra burst. Now do note that if you perform a full ultra, upon impact, it'll consume everything you have charged, meaning if you had red shield charge and full files, they'll all be gone. This is of course a trade-off for the damage you deal. Ultras are very powerful, but only use them if you can guarantee a hit. Plus, they're great for KOing a monster if you have an impact type charge blade. The more files you have, the greater the power. If you don't want to perform an ultra burst, however, you can cancel it if you pull back an X during the wind-up animation, i.e. at the very start you can cancel the ultra into a super. You'll know that you've done it right as you'll see this animation here where the blade sort of locks like this, and you'll instead use a single file as opposed to everything. This is really good for regular attacks because while it doesn't deal as much damage as an ultra, it's good to not always waste everything. Also remember that back plus X is relative to your position, so if you're facing left, then back is right, and if you're facing forward, back is back, etc. Alternatively, if you press R during the wind-up animation, you'll cancel your super and transfer your charged files to your shield. And this is how you get red shield charge. Remember I mentioned that the sword and shield shortcut only gives yellow shield charge, well this gives you red. And if you need to charge quickly from sword and shield, your best bet would be R+X, X+A and then R. Now moving over to jump attacks quickly, in sword and shield mode, pressing X whilst jumping off a ledge with either your weapon drawn or sheathed will perform a downward slice, and pressing X a second time after that hit will do a follow-up roundhouse slash which also ends in a guard point. Pressing X whilst in Axe mode will instead perform a downward chop, and if you want to jump off a ledge into Axe mode then it's R+X+A in the air. Now finally, before we move over to the other styles, let's talk quickly about guard points. See, guard points are a mechanic unique to the charge blade where your shield is presented during certain attack animations, and if you're hit at this moment, you'll guard. In Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, the timing used to be quite tough and they were pretty hidden, but now there's even a visual indicator to tell you if it's a guard point. Anytime you see this sort of steam effect, that means it's a guard point. For example, in Sword and Shield mode, after the third X attack, your shield is presented here, and this is a guard point. If a monster attacks you during this state, you block, and if you had red shield charge, you'd also deal burst damage. This guard point is also particularly forgiving in timing. One of the harder ones is pressing R+X together. The moment you're about to transform, there's a guard point right at the beginning. The timing is quite tight, but it's also the best one to do last minute. Alternatively, you can give yourself a bit more time with this one by adding an X attack at the front and going X, R+X. Or instead, whilst in Axe mode, pressing R to return to Sword and Shield also gives you another pretty forgiving guard point. And finally, as mentioned earlier, the roundhouse slash after the jump attack also has one too. Now guard points are often considered more advanced charge blade play, but do not be put off. If you can master them, they are much better than blocking. Unfortunately, you can no longer follow up into a super or an ultra like you could in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, but you can still go from a guard point into an attack much quicker than you could from guard. So, as I'm sure you can now begin to see, the focus is much more on Axe mode for damage now. The best way to use this weapon, as mentioned, is to use Sword and Shield to charge, and then Axe for damage. But, with all of that out of the way, let's now switch over to the other styles. To begin with, once again, the first draw for Striker will always be your ability to use 3 hunting arts, and for Charge Blade in particular, there is some great art synergy, so having the option to use 2 or more weapon-specific ones is a definite draw. However, as is often the case, this comes with its sacrifices. First of all, one of the big changes is that you no longer have the shield thrust, so pressing X plus A after any moves now does nothing. This also means that you have no shortcut for charging a yellow shield, although given that you want to avoid yellow shield charge, that's not really a big loss. In fact, depending on how long you've been using Charge Blade, this may or may not bother you too much. However, standalone X plus A does still perform the advancing strike, and it also now has a guard point at the start, which means you can use this to charge headlong into a monster's attack without fear of being knocked over. The one other slightly more hidden bonus, and this is a pretty big one, is that whilst charged, in Axe mode, striker attacks gain an additional 5% attack boost on top, which is, as I'm sure you can imagine, a pretty nice bonus. Aside from that, however, everything else is the same. Now moving on to aerial style. First of all, you only have access to one hunting art, so make sure you choose wisely. As for the changes, well, first of all, your A attack can no longer be charged, so it's instead a standalone up slash, which isn't that great on its own. You also can't combo into A anymore, so you can no longer go XA or XXA, nothing like that. However, shield thrust is back after any attack, and therefore so is your shield charge shortcut. But again, it only results in yellow, so it's still not that useful. Your X plus A advancing slash now no longer has a guard point at the start, and your sidestep still exists, but your forward roll is now instead a jump. Axe on the other hand is exactly the same, but once we get airborne is when things get interesting. See, with your weapon sheath, pressing X in the air will perform a more powerful downward slice, which is great for charging files. If we slow it down, notice the effect on the blade. This is now your substitute for charged A on the ground. R plus X plus A in the air will instead let you draw into an axe swing. Now with your weapon drawn, again X in the air will perform the same downward slice to charge your files, and R will morph into Axe. However, Axe whilst airborne is the real champion. Firstly, of course, you can still use R to morph back into Sword and Shield and again perform that charge slash. Pressing X whilst in Axe mode will perform a chop. However, X plus A will perform a burst chop which transforms into Sword and Shield at the end. But this has 3 versions. If you have no charged shield or files, you'll do a normal swing. Do this with files but not a charged shield and you'll do a super burst. And do this with files and a charged shield and you'll do an ultra burst. And while it might not be as powerful as a regular ground based one, it's fast and you can spam it. So with enough aerial pressure, you can make up the damage. Now finally moving over to Bushido. Again, this only allows the use of one hunting art, so choose wisely. But Bushido Charge Blade is a rather unique weapon. See, it's the only one that has access to both Bushido Guard and Bushido Dodge. Bushido Guard is of course whilst in Sword and Shield mode, and Dodge is whilst in Axe mode. To begin with, your charged A attack is back, but it also has a guard point at the start of it now, which is really nice. Your shield thrust is still present, but it's now only a thrust and cannot shortcut into shield charge, so it's still good for charging files and applying status effects, just not charging your shield. Aside from that, the base moves are the same, so let's take a look at the Bushido options. You perform a Bushido Guard by blocking as you're about to be hit, and it will then give you an opening to input a move. Pressing A after a Bushido Guard will perform an instant sword charge attack. However, pressing X after a Bushido Guard will do the shield charge round slash that normally follows the shield thrust in guild style. Performing this will charge your files, but what's more, if you already have charged files, it'll also transfer them straight into your shield, in turn giving you red shield charge. So in this style, you don't have to get red from Axe mode, you can instead get it from Bushido Guard. Now on the flip side, in Axe mode however, you perform a Bushido Dodge by rolling through an attack. Pressing X after this does a normal down swing, and pressing A performs the double horizontal swipe, and you can then follow this up into a super or ultra burst should you need to. Now finally, before we wrap things up, let's take a quick look at Hunter Arts. First up, you have Energy Blade. This uses the power in your charged files to create a blade of energy, and the more files you have, the more powerful the move and the bigger the blade. Overlimit on the other hand will temporarily increase the maximum number of files that you can charge up, and given that the previously mentioned Energy Blade depends on files, use it in conjunction with that for some serious damage. Or alternatively, perform an Ultra Burst with more files for some massive damage too. Finally, you have Healing Bottle, which actually turns Charge Blade into a great support weapon. Your files temporarily turn into healing files, and when you transfer a charge to your shield, you heal. However, the higher level versions allow you to heal people nearby too. Plus, the quality of the heal depends on the number of files. 5 files is akin to, say, a Mega Potion, whereas a full 10 files with Overlimit could be likened to a Max Potion. So there is some great support potential here. Now finally, to wrap things up, let's talk about my favourite style. This one's actually a really difficult choice. Charge Blade has always been a favourite weapon of mine, and each style brings something great to the table. Striker not only allows you to take advantage of the great Hunter Art synergies, but it also provides you with an attack bonus. Aerial provides you with a quick and dirty way to spam supers and ultras, and Guild provides you with the closest experience to Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, and again with some good Hunter Art synergy. Bushido, however, allows you to be hyper aggressive thanks to the Bushido guard and evade. Pair that with the fact that you also have guard points and you're onto a pretty lethal combination. So if I honestly had to pick a winner, I think for me it would personally be Bushido. It's probably the most technical use of Charge Blade, but if you can master it, you'll be a force to be reckoned with. And that, my friends, is pretty much it. I apologise that this was such a long tutorial, but as mentioned, there was a lot of stuff to talk about. Hopefully it's helped you better understand the weapon, and if it did, then a like would be super appreciated, especially considering this tutorial took forever to make, so your support would be amazing. But comment down below if you have any questions, and aside from that, thank you very much for watching. Tune in next Wednesday for the next weapon workshop, and take it easy, catch you next time, peace out.